To the Jewish people, Torah is a source of our identity and the source of our religious practice. As Jews, we engage with Torah by entering into a conversation that's been going on for thousands of years.
Because you have to think of the Torah as being kind of like lecture notes, right? Everything's in there, but obviously everything's not written in there, but everything is in there. This is one of the things we're taught. The whole world is in there. You just have to keep looking at it and looking at it and holding it up to a different light, or it's like a gem.
I mean, the Torah is the only thing I've encountered that seems supernatural to me. The Torah has meanings. The Torah's capacity to generate meaning, to reveal over and over again new things on every reading. I could say that about poetry, but there's a way in which the Torah does it that even Shakespeare doesn't do it.
Every synagogue I've served has a Torah scroll that survived the Holocaust. And every single one of them came from somewhere in the Czech Republic. While I was serving a synagogue in Wellington, New Zealand, I discovered that our Czech Torah scroll came from a town called Heřmanův Městec.
There was such, they said, we came to a town with a lot of shoes and Jews, when you translate it. Here, this area was known with shoes. Jewish people and not Jewish people, they worked in such places with shoes. It was a famous, I know because I'm from Pardubice, and this, so always Heřmanův Městec was known with shoes. The Jews, they came in the 15th century, and it was the first group here in this area of Jewish communities. They invited them because the Jewish people or the workers and the community was important for this nobility, and they liked them to have here. They worked and lived here. After 1848, so they could move to the whole town. They lived in the square, they had houses, also shoes they produced, and they were in the whole town. And the situation was very positive. They had never problems. She cannot remember, or she never heard that they had problems, Jewish, not Jewish.
Pamatuju se, protože bydlím v domě, kde bydlela rodina Židů. Táta od nich barák koupil. Takže jsem mezi nima vyrostla. No, pamatuju si, protože starý pán, který se jmenoval Šarpner, byl jako můj dědeček, tak jsem já k němu měla takovou lásku. A paní, to byla jako babička, ty měli 7 dětí. A každý byl ženatý a měl vnoučata. Takže jsem si s těma vnoučatama hrávala o prázdninách.
Hermina was born in 1892 to a Jewish family that sold feathers. She attended the Jewish German school, which had more Catholic students than Jewish students. Around the same time in which Hermina was born, a Hebrew scribe not far away was meticulously working on the Torah scroll that found its way to a synagogue in Wellington, New Zealand.
Having the opportunity to examine and repair Czech scrolls has been a real privilege, partly because they are artifacts and they deserve to be preserved. But it's also that There's a specific type of writing that they used to do, particularly in Bohemia, that I've learned. And there are things that you can tell from a Czech scroll, like the way what's in the ink, because of the color that it fades to, which is different than in other parts of Eastern Europe or different parts of, North Africa.
Hermina married the son of the local Jewish undertaker. After the birth of their daughter Anna, Hermina's husband left to fight in World War I. He never returned. Hermina remarried, this time to a local shopkeeper who was not Jewish. She had 3 more children. Her second husband took ill and met an early death.
I was born August 25th, 1924. My father died when I was 6 years old. Because I had very good marks at the local school, I was recommended for study at a secondary school. Because my mother was a widow raising 4 children, I was exempt from tuition, textbooks, and aids.
Hermina, twice widowed, took over the family shop and saw to it that all of her 4 children received an education. Anna, the oldest daughter, left Heřmanův Městec for life in the big city. She worked as a nanny until 1938, when she married Emil Pipal and gave birth to a daughter they called Jitka. Anna's husband resisted the Nazi occupation. He was captured and sent to prison, where he was executed. Anna and Jitka returned to Heřmanův Městec to live with Hermina and the rest of the family.
The Jewish Museum in Prague, the Central Jewish Museum in Prague, became actually a department of the Prague Jewish community. So there was a team of people. On one hand, there were art historians, there were Hebraists who were able to read the books, who were able to identify the books and so on. On the other hand, there were like administration people, administration staff, that means people who typed the registering cards and who unpacked the crates in the depositories and so on, and who worked with the objects on a more technical basis. These were people from the Prague Jewish community, and the problem was not only the amount of the objects, but also the fact that the people were deported to Terezin, to the concentration camp, which means that the staff, the museum staff, really like changed quite quickly.
One of the 100,000 plus objects was our Torah scroll from Wellington, New Zealand. In the past, it reminded me of ashes from the Holocaust. Today, it reminds me of the courageous leadership of Prague's Jewish community.
She came to the museum in 1943 as a co-curator or as assistant curator to Polak. It was quite interesting because she was an art historian who never had to do anything with Jewish art before. And she specialized in the 19th century, in painting and so on. And then she came to the museum. And she started to get very involved with the topic. As for the conditions, they were really stressed all the time. Most of them were Jewish. They really expected the deportation every day. But somehow they felt responsible for the museum very much, and I think they really did their best, They had the idea that they want the museum to work, that they want to keep the information about the object, so they really did a lot. But I think the situation must have been terrible here.
I would come after school whenever we had school, and I would spend time with her. This was a safe place to be. People would let me be in this place. Nobody bothered me. It was kind of a sad place. I remember that people wouldn't talk much, and they worked very hard at attaching little tags to thousands and thousands of objects that were made of silver or textiles or things like that. And they would put the objects in their proper places after cataloging them. And they looked pale and sort of sweaty, and didn't seem particularly pleased by what they were doing. I think that the people who are actually doing the physical work, writing the tags and carrying the stuff, were doing it because they hoped that they would have to leave for the concentration camp a little later than the other people. Well, everybody hoped that his work was indispensable during the war and that they wouldn't have to leave. My mother was doing this kind of thing also as a sort of a memorial for all the people she lost, and the list kept increasing. And so I think that her feelings of meaningfulness of this work may have been increasing as the war progressed.
It was only weeks after the Torah scrolls were shipped to Prague that Hermina's name came up for transport to Terezin.
In December of 1942, my mother, Hermina, my sister Anna, and her daughter Yitka were transported to the transit camp, Terezin, on transport CF through the nearby city Pardubice.
The people, they arrived from countries like Czech, Austria, Germany, Netherlands, and Denmark. From these 5 countries, they came through Terezin, because through Terezin came about 150,000 people in this time from November 1941 till the end of the war. And the people, they left Terezin by transports, and to extermination camps. They didn't know it, but sometimes some people, they stood there a week, a month, 2 months, 2 years. I was there 2 years.
Hermina, Anna, Yitka, and Elishka were all eventually moved from Terezin to Auschwitz.
We came at night to Auschwitz. So it was like a horror. We couldn't believe it, what's happened. The SS crying, and this capo, and all in Auschwitz. And it was really a shock. And then they told us to leave the train, to leave the luggage inside, and then we started to go in 5 in a row with 5, and on the end was an SS, and showed on one side and another side. We didn't know why, and so, and I always say that we had such an angel, and we came on the life side, me and behind my mother, on the life side, but we didn't know it. Not my father, he came straight to the gas chamber from this train.
Anna and Jitka also went straight to the gas chambers. Hermina, like Eliška, was selected for work detail in the labor camp.
A year later, I was nearly finished with high school and preparing for graduation. One day, I was summoned to the school head that asked me about my relationship to Judaism. I told him that my mother is a Jew and she is in concentration camp. The dean was a good man. Still, I did not tell him just how often I wonder how and why I had escaped that transport.
Legal status as an Aryan or a Jew meant the difference between life and death under the Nazis. Ladislav escaped that transport because his father was not Jewish.
They put them to different categories. Jew is the one that has Jewish father and Jewish mother. Mischling is the one that has Jewish parent and non-Jewish parent. Mischling is also the one that has a parent who is half Jewish and half Gentile. So they had different categories.
I was in this bizarre limbo. My father was a Christian, and I was younger than 14, or maybe it was 13. People who were of mixed race had to go to a special concentration camp in Bystrica, Ubenešova. But people who were of mixed race, who were younger than, I think it was 13, could actually make their own decision. And I think it was a loophole in the laws. My mother asked me if I wanted to go with her to Terezín, and I politely refused because I knew that all my friends have gone and we never heard from them. And I decided that maybe I would rather stay here alone than go to a concentration camp. And I thought this was a good decision. She was a little perplexed that I didn't want to be with her, but I assured her that I still loved her, but it was just the concentration camp that bothered me. I didn't like the idea.
While Ladislav Mareš continued his studies, his mother Hermina was transported from Auschwitz to a camp called Bergen-Belsen.
And by a train we left Auschwitz to Bergen-Belsen. It's very far. Auschwitz is at Krakow in Poland, and Bergen-Belsen, it's near Hamburg. We passed through whole Germany. It was something terrible. The people died on starvation. There was no food. You could stay there 2 months, and then you died.
After the war, I wanted to study. I had just confirmed admission to the Charles University when, as of June 1945, I received a message from Bergen-Belsen. My mother survived imprisonment in the concentration camps. I needed to go get her. She was in terrible physical condition. In these circumstances, I was forced to give up further studies.
Ladislav brought his mother home from Bergen-Belsen. The Torah scrolls from Heřmanův Městec remained in Prague.
Even if the Prague Jewish community really considered the museum as a actually storage, for the time after the war, and they really believed that the things will be given back to their owners or to their users and to the congregations, the fact was that approximately 10% of Bohemian and Moravian Jews came back and survived, and this was like disaster. And that means that the museum became actually the memorial of all the Jews who perished, of all the Jews who died.
She left, I think, at the beginning of February 1945. So she was 3 or 4 months. And as far as I know, she was the only inmate of any concentration camp that I ever heard of who returned in a taxi. She was quite enthusiastic about life. She was very happy to have been liberated. She was liberated by the Soviet army. She responded by joining promptly the Communist Party. She was a very intelligent woman, and she was also quite impatient. Her tolerance for fools was extremely low. The meetings of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia were as absurd as the meetings in Václav Havel's place or more, but they were obligatory. So she responded in her usual way. When she was bored, she fell asleep, which was not so bad. But unfortunately, this lady snored. And it was not just a sort of a light, sort of polite snore. Her snoring was, it sounded a little bit like a lawnmower. And so when she started snoring during the meeting, this was interpreted as an imperialist provocation. And when she did it for the 3rd time, she was expelled.
And then Volávková invented such an idea that she would build up an antique library in the Michle synagogue. That means she had the idea of really like laying the scrolls on racks. Up to 1956, the Torah scrolls were kept in the dry, heated building in Jáchymova number 3. So the condition didn't change actually since the war. The Michle synagogue had to be restored, and once it was restored, at least partially, they started to move the Torah scrolls like to the Michle synagogue, and they created such a place, such a library. But at the beginning of the 60s, the state started to push the museum to sell some of its objects and to get some money to the state budget. It's because the communist state was like the master like over everything, So when they had the feeling that they could support the export of the Czech Republic in some goods by, donating an item from the museum's collections, they did it. When they wanted to support their export, to the South Africa, and there was some, Jewish business partner who would be pleased by receiving something from the collections, they did it. And they pushed the museum to do it. And Volávková was strictly against it because really her approach was that every individual, every particular object is a witness to someone, to some congregation, and only as a whole, only intact, the collection makes sense. Because every object is a loss. It's a huge loss.
I think that they gave her a lot of trouble. I was surprised that they didn't actually fire her immediately, but they didn't. They just were sort of passive-aggressive, and they gave a lot of trouble. But she contributed to her trouble herself because she was so impatient. She was not very diplomatic about her relations with other people, and so she didn't have too many friends in the museum. She didn't have much support, so she was quite unhappy.
1961, Volávková left in the autumn, and there was a certain period, approximately 1 year, when the museum did not have any director, because the new director had been searched for, and there was a certain period, and in this period, I think the final decision that the Torah scrolls will be sold actually was made. And when the new director came, whose name was Vilém Benda, in the autumn 1962, It was actually already decided, so he had to deal with the technical part, of the sale of the transaction, and he approached the RTA, which was a company here who made business with cultural assets, and RTA, this company, started to search for some partner abroad who would buy either a part of the Torah Scrolls collection or a few pieces or the collection as a whole. And RTA approached Eric Estorig.
And he was asked if he would be interested in some Jewish memorabilia, all sorts of things to do with the lost Jewish community. And he said he would be. Estorig was the mover behind the original project. Ralph Yablon was the man who paid for this very expensive project. And Rabbi Reinhardt was the one here who took it upon himself to organize the arrival of the scrolls here and what we would do with them after that. It was a February day, wet and cold, quite unpleasant in a way, but we were hanging about outside the front doors of the synagogue waiting for this arrival. When it came, there were two enormous flatbed trucks which had traveled all across Europe from Prague, and very gently and with, shall I use the word reverence, these scrolls were handed down. They were carried into the synagogue and they were laid on the marble floor of the synagogue. People were in tears. There was a great deal of emotional disturbance, if you like. Because what they looked like, most of all, lying on the floor, were corpses, shrouds. They were all wrapped in polythene, and they looked as if they were dead bodies lying in the synagogue hall.
Imagine Ezekiel, the biblical prophet, looking out into the valley of dry bones. What he must have been thinking when God instructed him to breathe life into them. Rabbi Reinhardt looked out at the Torah scrolls carefully spread out on the floor of his synagogue. He saw Jewish life laying dormant.
Rabbi Reinhardt was a visionary, there's no doubt about it. And he had a vision of being instrumental in transporting the, how can I put it? Transporting the possessions of a lost community to those who needed them now. There was very little left in Prague and the Czech Republic of the original Jewish community. But a lot of them had gone to other communities. They'd sought sanctuary in America, in this country, and all across the world. And Rabbi Reinhardt could see that this mission was something which he, being a remarkable organizer, as well as a man of God, could take under his wing and could get moving. One day there was a knock at the synagogue door. We needed scribes. We had some scribes working on the scrolls, but they couldn't give enough time to it. And we needed somebody who would be prepared to really get stuck in and deal with the situation of whether a scroll could be repaired or not. So when our chief executive, to use a word she would not have used, Ruth Schaffer, who was another great important power behind the throne, when she answered that knock at the synagogue door, there was a little Orthodox Jew standing looking at her. He had very little English, but she spoke Yiddish. And he said, "I am a sofer, a scribe. Do you by any chance have any scrolls for repair?" And she said, "Do come in. We have 1,564 for you." She took him up to meet Rabbi Reinhardt. They got on immediately as if they'd been friends all their lives. And he stayed for over 25 years working on the scrolls. He was a delightful man. This is David Brand. He took over the whole operation of restoring and repairing the scrolls. What he was actually looking for was to see whether he could bring the scrolls back to use in the synagogue for services. For that, a scroll has to be perfect. and therefore, if he could make a scroll perfect, he would do so. Otherwise, he would do as much repair as he possibly could. And then the scrolls, if not kosher is the word that we use for a scroll that is fit, that is perfect. If they could not be made kosher, then they could be used perhaps as memorials. And that has happened all across the world, where we don't have a kosher scroll to send to a congregation. They have sometimes accepted a non-kosher scroll and built a beautiful surrounding for it to be housed in. What we did not want to do was to charge for scrolls. They were to be sent out on loan, indeterminate in time, and there was never any thought in any of our minds that we would make this a commercial proposition. That a request to be allowed to have a scroll should come from a congregation, an organization, a community of some kind. We would never accept a request from a private individual. It had to be addressed to the Scrolls Committee. It was a committee then, it became a trust shortly afterwards. And it had to be on official note paper, because sadly there is quite a lot of underhand buying and selling of scrolls. Because a perfect scroll is a very expensive object, and these were coming free. So we had to be very careful about what was happening, because we knew that there might well be unscrupulous people out there who would get hold of a scroll and then sell it on.
There was this complete flood of applications, and there were a lot of scrolls to find homes for. So that was the work that was going on when I came here, and you couldn't help but be very moved. I also live in this building, so there were at that point probably still over 1,000 scrolls on the same floor as the one on which our apartment was situated. Right next to our front door, there was an absolute morgue of scrolls. So one was very quickly drawn into this. It was something you just had to get involved with.
And we started off sending them out to, shall I say, deserving causes, to congregations who had not got a scroll, to organizations, old age homes, children's places, who really needed a scroll to encourage their young Jewish or old Jewish people.
There was very little checking up on what had happened to the scrolls, and that was something that as the years went by I became aware was a tremendous problem, because certainly in England, but especially in America, there's so many demographic changes, and scrolls are so often no longer in the synagogue to which they were originally assigned, and very often, if people don't keep telling the story becomes forgotten, and it is quite incredible that there are many congregations that are completely and utterly unaware that they have one of our scrolls.
What was going on with the Jews during the communist period? Which communist period? Stalinism? For the Jews in the 50s, very difficult. But for the Catholics, very difficult. For the Russian Orthodox, very difficult. But then after Stalin's death, things changed. Khrushchev was different. Was he good? Definitely not. He was better than Stalin to the Jews, to the Catholics, to the Protestants, to the Eastern Orthodox, to you name it.
Hermina lived in Heřmanův Městec and ran the family business until she retired and moved to a nearby town to live with her daughter. Like other survivors, she practiced Judaism in quiet moments by herself.
Babička, když se vrátila z koncentračního tábora, tak když jsme se jí ptali, tak nám nikdy nechtěla o tom hovořit, protože přicházela na smutné myšlenky. Ale poznali jsme to tím, že třeba když byla na zemi kůrka chleba, že jí tekly takhle slzy po tváři a že říkala, to by zachránilo 5 životů v koncentračním táboře.
When I was a kid, I was absolutely sure that my great-grandmother was a witch. My father would say, how do you know? Why do you guess that she was a witch? And I said, whenever we got to their house, she would be, and we were always coming, of course, Friday afternoon, she would light candles and she would say some abracadabra, and she was doing her witchhood, wasn't she? And my father said, no, your great-grandmother was just a Jewish woman who was saying the blessings for Shabbat.
My parents would kind of mention to me that he was either half Jewish or 1/4 Jewish, you know, and it was sort of like that he was sort of special, and I didn't really know whether the special meant good or bad, you know. I remember this was like I was a little kid.
I didn't realize much as a kid. The music was beautiful and the days were beautiful. Then, of course, if you go to school and they teach you things that your parents totally disagree with, and they try to protect you, but on the other hand, they don't want to educate you to be a brainwashed idiot or a hypocrite, I think it had to be very difficult for my parents, not so difficult for me. After '68, everything changed, because then we were literally occupied.
I was 11, and the Soviets came. The Russians came, you know, which was like a huge shock. I remember the sick woman like running and screaming, tanks are coming. And there were like tanks rolling in on the cobblestones, like terrible racket. And like Polish soldiers with machine guns, like pointing at everybody.
Hermina witnessed the end of the Habsburg dynasty. Twice widowed, she survived Nazi camps, only to finish her days under communism's iron fist. Hermina Marashova died on March 6, 1976. She was laid to rest in the overgrown Jewish cemetery in Heřmanův Městec.
They abused brutally the students who were demonstrating on National Avenue, and so the parents said enough is enough. Students got to general strike, and most of the parents got to general strike also in their factories, but this is Prague. Then the information is delivered semi-secretly and secretly with all kind of leaflets and, you know, like secret broadcasting, unofficial pirate broadcasting to the other towns and villages. And so practically the entire country got on general strike. So this is what we call Velvet Revolution. I was already back in Prague clinking the keys with the others, you know, like clinking the bell of death of communism.
There was a path that I would go very often that just led through the gypsy colony and the synagogue. And it was just, you would wonder when it's gonna just collapse. There were like, I think there were like, I don't think if there were any windows left at all, like no glass, maybe I think there was some bars or something. And it was like all beaten and really like kind of dark and looked like kind of like some sort of ghost building. Like you wouldn't even want to go inside. It was sort of almost kind of scary, abandoned, and you know, had this kind of weird air around it.
Tady nebyli kromě pana Mareše žádní přeživší. Shoah tady nikdo nepřežil. jedině maminka pana Mareše. Tady nebylo pamětníků.
Ladislav Mareš began tracing his Jewish roots after his mother's death. He visited the chief rabbi in Prague to confirm that having a Jewish mother made him a Jew as well. In a new democratic Czechoslovakia, Ladislav turned his attention to preserving Jewish historical sites in his hometown, beginning with the cemetery.
V roce 89 a v roce 1990 pan Mareš sám začal s obnovou židovského hřbitova.
Na hřbitově jsme museli nejdřív vysekat kapku trávu, aspoň vždycky, aby se nechali udělat 2 kroky dopředu. Vyřezat tam větve, aby se nechalo aspoň postavit. A postupně jsme vyklízeli ten hřbitov tak, aby jsme tam mohli procházet a pak už ve finále se už jenom občas narovnal nějaký náhrobek. A nás to zapálilo oba dva už jenom proto, že ta babička se z toho koncentračního tábora vrátila a že bylo spousta věcí, které by se měly udělat už jenom proto, aby jsme i my našli ten svůj hrobek na tom hřbitově, aby jsme věděli, jak vypadá synagoga v celku a další věci.
Ladislav generated support for the renovations wherever he could. Local and national government provided public funding.
Bylo to strašně drahé, ale ne všechno se má přepočítávat na peníze. Určitě, ale bychom nemohli zvládnout tyto stavební aktivity jenom z rozpočtu města. Jakkoliv z rozpočtu města šlo hodně peněz, myslím, že klíčová byla potom státní dotace, kterou jsme získali.
Rabbi Rosalind Gold and her husband Ted Smith are members of a synagogue in Northern Virginia that cares for one of the Torah scrolls from the town. They visited Heřmanův Městec in 1993.
We were also, I think, the first. He was so stunned, I think, to see us because we were the first people ever to show. I mean, they knew their Torahs were someplace, and they had a list. I think they had gotten a list of.
They had a very partial list. They had someone in Australia.
Ladislav corresponded with Jewish communities in Australia who had Torah scrolls. He shared his passion for the renovations with everyone he met. Social studies teacher and town archivist Eva Bochkova recruited high school students to research and document Ladislav's family story in an innovative Holocaust education project.
And the teachers who were deeply interested into teaching Holocaust in a new, better way, not only as one of the aspects of the World War II, they started to call there into the educational center, asking for advice how to teach. Quite often, the children start with publishing an advertisement in a journal, addressing the people who live in the same town, asking for the help, asking the people to bring things, to bring articles, to bring diaries, to bring photographs. And the people sometimes are not excited about speaking, about their role in these matters. But some people cooperate with the children and help them. As the children, as usual, are excited, as they work as a real historian, they are the first, mostly, who searched after the Jews from their towns.
máme tady koncerty židovských písní, jo. Takže my každý rok tady něco v té synagoze, něco máme židovského. Připomínáme si i ten nešťastný holokaust, který byl, jo. Takže u nás ta synagoga je součástí kulturního života v Heřmanově Městci i s tím židovstvím.
Ladislav Mareš died on the 22nd of February 2007. His daughter buried him in the Jewish cemetery with his mother and grandmother.
One of the responsibilities that comes with having a scroll is to keep alive in a town which no longer has Jews, to keep alive a Jewish presence in the town. These are towns where the Jews were part of the community for hundreds of years.
In October 2008, members of our congregation in Wellington, New Zealand, brought our Torah scroll back to Heřmanův Městec for a visit. There we met a rabbi from a synagogue in North Carolina who also brought a Torah that came from the town. In the synagogue, we shared a ceremony with local residents celebrating Simchat Torah, the holiday finishing the yearly Torah reading cycle and beginning it again.
Emocionální to bylo pro mě hodně, protože si uvědomuji, že to je úplně něco mimořádného, když se ty dvě tóry jako vrátily a v podstatě zprostředkovali setkání lidí z takhle různých konců. Ale vůbec jako emoce spojená s návratem těch tór, když jsem viděl, jak je tam vrací a teď zase pak s nimi obcházejí, tak to bylo velmi silný.
I really felt this incredible affection for our scroll in a way that it was not just a scroll. I felt like it was alive in a way that I hadn't ever thought about it before.
Já jsem věřící člověk, já jsem katolík a praktikující katolík. A myslím, že právě proto dokážu rozpoznat, jak některé symboly jsou strašně důležité pro udržení víry. Proto jsem to bral velmi emotivně.
No jako hlavně, když to vidíte předtím na obrázku, že jo, a teďka najednou to máte tady před sebou, můžete se na to šáhnout, tak... Mě dostalo, že vlastně Židí z jednoho konce světa vlastně přijedou sem k nám a když na ní šáhli ty naši Židí, tak mě to dostalo, já jsem se rozbrečela prostě úplně. Takže se mnou to udělalo hodně, no.
To see on their faces an appreciation and a healing in the form of our giving to them of our time and travel and reminding them of the civic treasure that they had in the form of a Jewish culture, represented by the Torah scroll itself.
Ale ve skutečnosti je to vlastně velmi také smutné, protože to, že vy přijíždíte z Nového Zélandu do Heřmanova Městce, to je přece způsobeno právě tím, že tady židovská obec zanikla holokaustem. Mnohem přirozenější by bylo, aby tady dál židovská obec byla. To je smutné.
There were a lot of people crying, and they weren't Jewish. And the way people, you know, reached out to touch the Torah in the way they came and looked at it afterwards. It wasn't a manufactured thing at all, you know, and it wasn't just a curiosity. I think it was just a whole sense of loss of what they'd had in that community, Jewish or non-Jewish.
Oni se mě ptají, že oni mají otázky různé teďka po té středeční oslavě, takže já zodpovídám, že zase se ptají, co je to Tóra a tak dále, zastavují mě, takže jim můžu zodpovídat tyhle otázky. A je to fajn, protože to vychází od nich, ta iniciativa. Oni mají zájem o to, vědět, co je tohle, co je tamhleto. Takže je to určitě oboustranně báječný.
For the sake of the scroll and for the sake of the people who were lost, I thought it did something, for me it did something about those lives that were lost. Never bring them back, and it's a very minor kind of a thing, and it's probably, it might even be a bit selfish to say that because it's just something that I feel. And yet all those people were still killed. I can't do anything about that, but I felt that we did something to honour their absence by that trip.
Using these Torah scrolls for some commemoration, like events, they actually build up a bridge between the past, between the Bohemian and Moravian congregations and people who vanished, who disappeared, who just perished, and the future, you know. And I think even if it's a huge loss for the museum, this makes sense, you know, building up bridges between the past and keeping the past alive and between the future, you know. So I think that the Torah scrolls were quite lucky. You know, they were not sold for some like private purposes, you know, to be in some private collection and so on. They were sold, but still, it makes sense.
Určitě vzpomínala jsem právě při té oslavě na tátu, jakou by měl velkou radost on.
My jsme to nespůsobili, ale my na to nesmíme, jakkoliv jsme to nezažili. Naše generace, jakkoliv jsme to nezažili, my na to nesmíme zapomínat, protože člověk se nemění tak rychle. Takové zlo by se mohlo opakovat.
I think that we did do a significant thing and a very positive and constructive thing in taking that Torah scroll on a journey that was very symbolic of its past history.
Že svitky Tóry jsou po celém světě, to je dobře. To je dobře, to je správné, mají sloužit tomu, k čemu byly s úctou vyhotoveny. Že jsou v celém světě, to je čest pro naše město. A kdokoliv z celého světa přijede k pramenům do Heřmanova Městce, bude vždycky vítán.